Hi, my name is Brian Curtis, and I'm the founder of Decentralized Systems. And today I have Dr. Miluna Fausch with me, who's an executive coach and consultant, also, correct?
Yes.
So I'll ask you, of course, the first question I always ask everybody: How did you get into it? Maybe what you did before you started this job. What promoted you to start this profession, and what motivates you?
I think everything I've ever done has led up to this point. I've been in love with the voice since I was a little girl. So imagine a little girl swinging on the swing set in the backyard, and I would dream of either being a famous singer or a race car driver. So something about the voice and the sound of engines. Love the resonance of engines. And my undergrad degree is music business and voice. So I've always trained the voice and worked with this, and then acting training. I did a lot of things. I worked with nonprofits and did real estate investing. I've done all sorts of things. I'm really a great experimenter. Then I coached actors and singers on voice and stage presence, but they don't always make great clients. They don't always have money, or they don't want to pay. They don't understand that anything you do beautifully, in my opinion, you train for. So always observing business people and salespeople, and they didn't seem to know how to prepare or pitch or do a real sales call that was authentic and lovely. So I realized business people were the people I wanted to work with anyway. I consider myself a business person, and that CEOs and executives would want to address that skill gap of not being able to show up, communicate well, and have stage presence and charisma, meaning influence.
So you work mostly on that stage presence and charisma for leaders, that you maybe taught in the acting community at the same time?
Yeah, the show business was the best training for all of this. And that's a lot of it. And then a lot of just specific strategies for what they're doing. Is this a board meeting? Is this for the stakeholders? What is the arena so that we can polish and fine tune the words, the message, and the delivery to be effective?
Right. Interesting. So where did you go to school for as an actor or actress, or did you teach in school?
Always,
Okay.
always.
What college did you go to?
Well, my undergrad is Indiana State University. That's music business. And then as far as theater, I can't even tell you all the
Places you've
schools.
been.
And probably my favorite was Beverly Hills Playhouse.
Okay.
And that was 2 or 3 years I was a student there. And they took it very seriously. We met 3 times a week to be in actor class.
What was your favorite what was your favorite part about that? I mean, just getting to know people, or just, kind of putting yourself out there on stage, or what was your favorite part?
The scene study is my favorite because we had to apply to do a scene. And then you'd pick your partners and pick your role and rehearse and prepare and then present it in front of your classmates. So usually it was a pretty non-competitive space, although our teacher was a pretty aggressive dude. But that's where you get to work it out. You get to see if it was effective. You get to manage your stage fright or your nervousness and receive very laser focused feedback. So that was priceless.
Nice. Acting has always really interested me because, everyone has to kind of put on and think of that mask that they're putting on and that character that you're putting on and you're trying to portray. And I think people naturally do that unconsciously anyway, because they have this unconscious desire to, project themselves in front of other people in a certain way. And we, have a tendency to not get vulnerable. We don't, stay vulnerable in front of people. And, I think you kind of have to work on both fronts, right? You kind of have to be vulnerable to the process of becoming this character on stage and just allow it to happen. Am I wrong there?
You're exactly right. That beautifully said, Brian. That's exactly it. The secret to great performing is to be in the moment. And it is real, whether I'm playing a character or it's me, myself, and I, it is so real. I don't think folks understand that.
Right.
And when you're in that moment and you're listening, then you're responding to that character. Or when I used to perform as a singer, all I need to do is feel it. I own the lyrics. I pick songs that were magic for me. I feel it. I bring it through my body. And it really is that simple. It's so hard to do, but it really is. And it's what you said, be vulnerable, open your heart, connect to your audience, regardless of who they are. That's when we love it. And it's no different in the business world, connecting with folks, employees, clients,
Yeah.
customers, your board, allowing that beautiful vulnerability and realness to be part of that exchange.
Yeah, that's about relationships in general, right? When you close yourself
Yes.
off and you can't stay vulnerable to the people around you, then people, well, it kind of creates an atmosphere of untrust because you don't know where people are coming from. So, well, I would like to ask you, do you have any techniques that you like to teach leaders to try and maybe come out of their shell and become more vulnerable so that they feel more comfortable and, regardless of what kind of response? Because if you start reacting to the responses you get around you, then, people have a tendency to close themselves off. Is there any techniques that you suggest to make sure that you don't do that and you stay vulnerable no matter what kind of reactions you're getting in your atmosphere?
Yes, I do. And it is tricky. And it's what you said. I think great leaders need to absolutely be vulnerable. We need to stop with all of this not saying the truth or not speaking up in a diplomatic and lovely way. I help them to stay in the moment. A lot of them are engineers, so they're in their head, right? They've been rewarded for their thinking. So we get into the ego mind. Well, the ego wants to protect us from being hurt or being vulnerable. So I like to encourage them to use a sense of humor, which some of them have never used before. We work on being more charming. We work on telling a story because people don't really care. They just want to know, do you care? And what is your story? That's what we remember.
Right.
So we might practice with poetry. If they need a little more music in their voice, I call it, or maybe they speak like this in a flat line with no range and no dynamics. Sometimes we'll work with song lyrics or poetry, or we'll just pull apart their presentation into starting at the end or starting in the middle. And then I just teach them the art of breathing and the pause. And when we'll pause and observe what was just said instead of taking it right in, that's when we can respond and not react. Because we all know we've said things we wish we hadn't have said out of a reaction,
Right.
that the mature, loving way would be, let me think about that and ask a question. I'm going to respond, not react.
Yeah. And get out of your head, right? Usually you're
Get
reacting
out of
from
your head.
some kind of preconceived notion in your head, and you're not in your heart space.
That's exactly it. We've got to stay in the body. So I can always tell when my leaders are moving up into the head space and, all right, let's breathe. Sometimes I will tell them to think of their big toes. Think of your big toes. That helps anchor right back in the body. So little simple things they'll remember to do are very helpful.
I think humor is a big part of it. When you don't feel like you can joke around and things get too serious, you're starting to kind of create walls, right? And you show up and say, "Hey, we're showing up to work and we're having fun together," right? I mean, I worked in a couple of different atmospheres, and I've had people approach me before because I would joke around with supervisors or other people, and somebody would set me aside and say, like, "Hey, you can't talk to them like that way," and I'd say, "Why not? Why shouldn't I make them feel as comfortable as possible?" Right? Because then, communication doesn't break down, and they feel it more open or easy to tell you what, maybe is bothering them. And then, that's where you really start to make progress, I think, and communication happens a lot better.
It does. And I don't know where all these rules came from. Yes, I hear you. I had a CEO my early days. This was a nonprofit in Virginia, actually an association. And everyone was terrified of the boss. And I thought, well, I wonder why. It's that hierarchy, that patriarchy, right? That used to be more prevalent. It's still here, but at least some of that's gone away. I found him to be incredible. I spoke clearly with him. He was clear. He told me exactly what he needed and when he needed it. I loved that because I knew exactly what I was being asked to do. For me, it was refreshing. I had
Yeah,
no issue with him at all. I thought he was brilliant and I respected him. And there's a difference between maybe being afraid and respecting. He was just a man. And I had a good relationship with him because of that.
he showed you the boundaries that he expected, right? And then you probably responded in the same way. It's like, hey, this is, and it's a perfect relationship, right? Because you're both understanding each other very well, and it just moves great.
It did. He never disrespected me ever. So I didn't want to participate in the fear or whatever all that was. Oh, Bernie's here. Well, he's just another human being and he cares about the same things we do.
So do you have a favorite size company that you like to go after, or maybe a favorite industry that you maybe you see suffers more than others? You know, in my experience, the bigger the business, usually the harder it is to break those communication barriers, because the more people you have, you just end up in larger and larger social cliques that just aren't talking as much. And so everyone have all these preconceived ideas of what other people are thinking, and they're not, you know, they might interact with 20 people, and it's just impossible to really talk to everybody in the business. So, you know, it just natural barriers show up.
I do tend to like smaller companies. I don't know that I have a dollar figure. When I was living in Silicon Valley before the pandemic and all of that, I used to go to a startup company that was there, very well funded startup. And they trained me to, hired me to train the entire customer success team. So that happened to be 13 people from all over the world, different first languages, different sensibilities. And I absolutely loved that because it was one-to-one work. And I would just go in one day, 2 days, and everyone would show up. And no excuses. Dr. Miluna is here. It's coaching time, and here we go. And I got to help each person develop their own superpowers more, their own ability to communicate better through all the barriers of language and religion and all the things. And I'm not sure what their revenues were, but it was quite exciting. So if I can work either with the leader, because I know he or she will change the rest of the company, or an entire leadership team, that's the magic for me. Because I know that will just filter out and domino out and change the rest of the company.
Yeah, and I think there's a big undercurrent, and I'm sensing this across the whole spectrum, because we're, you know, pushing towards a recession. And I think during recessions, you really, as a person, evolve a lot if you can stay in that spirit of trust, and just trusting that, hey, this is just part of a cycle. You know, it's a restriction, but, you know, on the whole, but there's always a learning process behind that, you know, and there's always reasons why that happens. And then all these great innovations come into being, and people start working together more than they would, I think, you know, when the money's good. When there's a lot of money coming in, people have a tendency to kind of separate a little bit more, but then people have to start relying on each other a lot more when things start to slow down and break down. And I think communication and relationships get a lot better. I tell this story all the time. We have property in Idaho, and that place in Idaho that we go to every once in a while is one of my favorite places on earth. It's a
Mm.
poor community, but for that reason, they rely on each other a lot more. And those relationships are very established. It doesn't matter what happens to the economy, that place will stay the same year in, year out, right? It's those communities that really make you value each other. And I think in times like this, people learn that money really isn't the most important thing. It's these relationships that we form and base, and then money is just kind of a byproduct of that, right? And that we get to share it and just, do what we can for each other and then evolve that way.
It's true what you say. During times of recession or restriction, we are more creative. And studies show that. We know that, for example, if I say, go in a room, Brian, and create something, and I'll come back in 2 hours, that actually doesn't give you anything to work with. Now, sure, you'll come up with some things, but if I put you in a safe container and I say, I want to have a new logo, and here's the business I'm thinking of creating, and here are 6 crayons, and I'll be back in an hour, you'll actually be way more creative and more strategic within the boundaries. So even for creative folks like us and actors and singers, we need a great director. We need a great script. It allows us to fully express. And it's what you said, we learn to value. It's not profits over people. And every time we go through a learning curve like this or a recession, I think humanity's again being reminded it's not profits over people. We need to be not codependent, independent, but interdependent and working together.
Yeah, and I think actually COVID in a lot of ways was a blessing in disguise because people realized in a very short amount of time how important it was to stay in contact. And because, when people started separating and you getting afraid of being sick, the fear of being sick and being separated was worse than getting sick and just being part of the group. And I think, 90% of the people that were in these work environments and having to stay at home could pretty much agree on that. I mean, everybody that I knew that, especially in my internal family, that felt like they needed to stay home and just stayed isolated, they got sick anyway. And it really didn't matter. And they ended up, going through a lot of anxiety that from not being interactive with the community more than they would have if they just would have gone ahead and gone out there and maybe done whatever practices they need to feel safe, but just to make sure that they stayed, interacting. I think that was, I think it really taught that lesson.
It did. We're not designed to be solo. We're really not. I know I went out as much as I could anyway, being smart about it, but it was rough. We know that school kids were very affected, a lot of personalities. It was not good for us. So I think we've learned, we shall see. I hope we have, that our people and our friends and family, folks we work with, matter. They matter so much.
Right. Yeah. So let me ask you, do you have any stories you can think of? Maybe some success stories, maybe somebody that you saw transform before you and felt easier in their environment? I would like to hear some stories along that, maybe, or maybe even some stories about when you were teaching some actors, some schools. That really intrigues me because I would love to be part of some of that stuff, and I just never did when I was younger.
Well, I think I only lasted in the public school system 1 year. That was tricky. I had huge discipline problems. These kids were not raised in the era I was, where you sat down and you did not sass the teacher.
Right.
You respected the teacher and called them Mr. or Mrs. It was just a respect thing. I can tell a story of a client that really, really transformed. This was a highly educated, super intelligent woman that happened to be born in Russia. And she worked for Workday. She may still. And she said, I'm not good at small talk. I'm terrified. I don't know what to say to the boss. He's in the elevator with me. I don't know what to say. Because other countries are so much more formal than the United States. So she was very good in English, but she was always up here because she was so well educated and really rewarded again for that brain work, rewarded for the intellect. She didn't have the social skills. So we just worked on what would you talk about and what is interesting. And I coached her to have 2 or 3 things to say. what's happening this weekend? What's on the agenda this weekend? My husband and I are going to do this coming up tomorrow. And just a number of things. I don't remember all the specifics, but she just had to learn how to get out of always overthinking, being very competitive and in a presentation mode. And understanding that the role there was not to be a teacher, but to be a colleague, regardless of if it is the boss or not, because she was seeking a promotion. So she had to get comfortable with that and with that entire process. Because as you know, if we don't show who we really are and we can't sell ourselves in a authentic or connection type of way so that they can feel us, then there won't be any chemistry.
Right.
And we know we get more jobs and promotions because of two things: empathy and that energy. Do we feel a connection? You can call it culture if you want, but that's what it is. So I used to go on the train, go into San Francisco and meet her at her apartment building in the community room. And we would just work for a couple of hours at a time. So I just watched her become so much more warm. And she was warm, she just didn't show it. Friendly, at ease with herself, and able to carry on so-called small talk conversations. Then we also worked on company presentations, because the more at ease, the more she asked for opportunities and the more presentations she was invited to do. So she just became what I think is the real version of herself. Said, I don't want part of you showing up. I want all of you showing up. And we were able to do that over a period of, I guess that was about 3 months that we worked together.
Wow, that's a good story. And I'm
Yeah.
sure you'll agree with this, but you realize that people have this inside of them, and you just kind of become the conductor for that. You're not giving them something that they didn't already have. You're just showing them, just, hey, you already have this inside of you. Just keep working on it and just keep moving forward. And then you get to see that process. I think that's sounds pretty rewarding.
It's so rewarding. When they find that voice, everything changes. I love that you said conductor. That's it. I'm just drawing out their brilliance and helping them express that inside out so that they can really make that impact and be much more effective and influential for good.
Well, yeah, and you're at peace too, because you're not trying to hold anything back. It's just like,
Yes.
this is me. It doesn't matter if you like me or don't like me. It doesn't matter. This is me. I'm gonna throw it at you, and then you can just take me or leave me, right? It doesn't matter.
It is better if we can let go of what I call it FUPU.
Boo-boo.
Fear of FOOPO, fear of other people's opinions.
Yeah.
It is so much better because we can be the most kind person in the entire world, but somebody doesn't like us and we don't even know why. So we just have to be the best of who we are and continue to show up and do what we're here to do.
In my experience, it's usually the people that are like that, though, are not happy with themselves, and they haven't found that wall. They haven't found that vulnerability. And, it's easy for people that have gone through that. I've gone through my own stories over my life. I was very closed off when I was younger because my family never really, they didn't really show affection that much. And it took me a long time to understand that, hey, this is, you know, I'm just doing this to myself. All I have to do is just open up and just, because you're afraid of nothing really. That fear is what's causing you pain. That's what's causing the pain.
Agree. Agree.
Well, thank you for showing up today, Dr. Miluna. This was an excellent conversation.
Oh,
If
my
you
pleasure.
if you have any closing comments, I'll give it to you, and then we'll call it a day.
Let's wrap up by saying this. I just believe that a path to wellness is our voice because it is self-expression and it is healthy. And when we can find that inner voice and align our voice with our purpose, that's when everything around us changes.
Thank you. I'm not going to add anything to that. Have a wonderful day, and I will keep in touch.
Thank you.